In Hosea 6:6, God asks a rhetorical question, "O Ephraim, what shall I do to you?" Hosea went on to show how Israel valued the outer appearance rather than the inward reality. When God looked on Israel with the hope that Ephraim had repented and returned to him, God saw only the iniquity of Ephraim. Hosea 7:1 and 2. When I would have healed Israel, then the iniquity of Ephraim was uncovered, and the wickedness of Samaria. For they have committed fraud. The thief comes in, a band of robbers takes spoil outside. They do not consider in their hearts that I remember all their wickedness. Now their own deeds have surrounded them, and they are before my face. Ephraim has taken what does not belong to him. They are like the one who has committed fraud and acted as a thief and a robber. They didn't believe that God had seen and would remember their deeds. In this section of Hosea, God reveals their evil deeds. I'm Dan Cathcart, and this is the voice of the prophets. During this time frame, Israel goes through 5 kings, 4 of whom were assassinated. Hosea compares Israel, and especially her leaders, to an out-of-control oven. Hosea 7:3 and 4. They make a king glad with their wickedness, and princes with their lies. They are all adulterers, like an oven heated by a baker. He ceases stirring the fire after kneading the dough until it is leavened. This is a time when the kings are quickly overturned, one after another. They show their ruthlessness by their hunger for power, assassinating the previous king in order to gain power. Their adulteries are like a heated oven, waiting to consume the bread when its leavening is complete. Leaven frequently represents sin. In this case, the heated passions of adultery await for the opportunity to gratify it. Now, this seems to happen at some particular event associated with the king, perhaps a birthday coronation. Hosea 7, verse 5. In the day of our king, princes have made him sick. Inflamed with wine, he stretched out his hand with scoffers. Now, the imagery of heat or flame is now extended to the inflamed senses of drunkenness. The king stretches out his hand or extends favor to scoffers. These are probably those who don't believe in God or don't think that God sees and judges their iniquity. They feed their passions like an oven. Hosea 7, 6 through 7. They prepare their hearts like an oven while they lie in wait. Their baker sleeps all night. In the morning it burns like a flaming fire. They are all hot like an oven, and have devoured their judges. All their kings have fallen. None among them calls upon me. Now their passions heat uncontrolled because the baker is sleeping. Their fire devours their judges. Chaos reigns. Their kings have fallen, one after another. Hosea then extends the baking comparison to a cake that is not turned in the baking process. Hosea 7, 8 and 9. Ephraim has mixed himself among the peoples. Ephraim is a cake unturned. Aliens have devoured his strength, but he does not know it. Yes, gray hairs are here and there on him, yet he does not know it. The comparison here has 2 parts. The first is that Ephraim, as a partially baked cake, is part dough and part cake. He is neither an idolater nor a worshiper of God. This makes Ephraim vulnerable to his enemies. This is the second aspect of a cake not turned. Ephraim's enemies will quickly devour him, as men who don't wait for the entire baking process before devouring the food. Hosea indicates that the time that Ephraim will be devoured by his enemies is quickly approaching. Ephraim is getting old and doesn't realize it. The prophets, including Hosea, warned that the fall of Israel was imminent, but Ephraim dismissed the warning. Look at Hosea 7, verse 10. and the pride of Israel testifies to his face. But they do not return to the Lord their God, nor seek him for all this. Instead of seeking God, they did just the opposite. Like a bird, they fled from God and looked to Egypt and Assyria. Hosea 7:11-13. Ephraim is like a dove, easily deceived and senseless, now calling to Egypt, now turning to Assyria. When they go, I will throw my net over them. I will pull them down like birds of the air. When I hear them flocking together, I will catch them. Woe to them, because they have strayed from me. Destruction to them, because they have rebelled against me. I long to redeem them, but they speak lies against me. But Ephraim cannot flee from God. God will pursue and capture Ephraim. They will not escape God's judgment, even though God longs to heal them and redeem them. God will instead bring judgment against them because they did not cry out to him with sincerity in their hearts. Look at Hosea 7:14-15. They did not cry out to me with their hearts when they wailed upon their beds. They assemble together for grain and new wine. They rebel against me. Though I disciplined and strengthened their arms, yet they devise evil against me. They return, but not to the Most High. Although they gathered together to bring offerings of grain and new wine, they were in rebellion. Remember, these offerings were to be taken to the place where God placed his name. Israel took these offerings to the golden calves and other idols. They rebelled against God. They made a pretense of returning to God, but in reality, they were turning to their idols. Hosea 7:16. They return, but not to the Most High. They are like a treacherous bow. Their princes shall fall by the sword for the cursings of their tongue. This shall be their derision in the land of Egypt. Egypt, the nation out of which God delivered them, as well as one of the nations that Israel turned to for help, would mock them. Instead of being a light to the nations and a model nation, demonstrating the righteousness and justice of God's statutes, Israel is a mockery. Judgment is coming swiftly at the sound of the shofar. Hosea 8:1-3. Set the trumpet to your mouth. He shall come like an eagle against the house of the Lord, because they have transgressed my covenant and rebelled against my law. Israel will cry to me, my God, we know you. Israel has rejected the good. The enemy will pursue him. Now notice that judgment is falling, not on Israel, but on the house of the Lord. Once again, although they claim to know God, they have not followed in his ways. Both Moses and Joshua, before their deaths, warned the children of Israel that they could choose life and good or death and evil. By rejecting the good, they have chosen death and evil. Hosea then turns to all the ways that they have rejected God's statutes. Hosea 8:4-5. They set up kings, but not by me. They made princes, but I did not acknowledge them. From their silver and gold they made idols for themselves, that they might be cut off. Your calf is rejected, O Samaria. My anger is aroused against them. How long they attain to innocence? They set up their own kings, rejecting God as their king and later the house of David that God had chosen. They selected leaders, but not according to the directions that God had given Moses. They made idols to worship instead of worshiping God. Jeroboam built 2 golden calves, one in Samaria and one in Dan, and proclaimed that these calves were the God that brought them out of Egypt. 1 Kings 12:28-30. Therefore the king asked advice and made 2 calves of gold and said to the people, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up from the land of Egypt. And he set one up in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Now this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. God rejected the calf and their worship at the calf. Hosea concludes with a question. How long until they attain to innocence? Now, what does it mean to attain to innocence? The Stone Edition Tanakh translates this question as, how long will they be incapable of cleansing? The J.P. Green literal translation renders this question as, until when will they not attain purity? The word attain is the Hebrew word yakol, number 3201, meaning to be able. The word innocence is the Hebrew word nikayon, number 5356, meaning clearness, cleanness, innocence. Nikayon comes from the word nakah, number 5352, meaning to be clean, to acquit, clear, cleanse, or be made blameless. This is the word God used in proclaiming his name to Moses. Exodus 34, verse 7. Keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. God's original 10 words shed additional light on whom he extends mercy and who is not cleared. Exodus 20, 5 through 6. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. Mercy is extended to those who love him and keep his commandments. Those who hate him will not be cleared. So the answer to Hosea's question is that the northern kingdom of Israel is not able to attain innocence until they love God and keep his commandments. Until then, their iniquity will fall on them and their children, and chaos and destruction will fall on Israel. Hosea 8, 7 through 9. They sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. The stalk has no bud. It shall never produce meal. If it should produce, aliens would swallow it up. Israel is swallowed up. Now they are among the Gentiles, like a vessel in which is no pleasure. For they have gone up to Assyria, like a wild donkey alone by itself. Ephraim has hired lovers. Instead of sowing the good seed in the land, they saw the wind which has no substance. They reap the whirlwind which leaves destruction in its wake. What grows does not produce fruit, and any fruit that matures is swallowed up by the nations. This metaphor applies to both the spiritual and economic state of Israel. They are spiritually and economically bankrupt. Hosea then goes on to the issue with the golden calf which started them on their path to destruction. The golden calves had become altars for sinning. Hosea 8, 11 through 13. Because Ephraim has made many altars for sin, they have become for him altars for sinning. I have written for him the great things of my law, but they are considered a strange thing. For the sacrifices of my offerings, they sacrifice flesh and eat it, but the Lord does not accept them. Now he will remember their iniquity and punish their sins. They shall return to Egypt. They do not remember God's Torah. They do not keep mercy, so God will remember their iniquity. He will by no means clear the guilty. They shall return to Egypt. In this case, Egypt is metaphorical for their slavery before God delivered them and took them as his people. The northern kingdom of Israel would be as if they were not his people. They had committed idolatry, not only at the golden calves, but at the threshing floors. Look at Hosea 9, 1 and 2. Do not rejoice, O Israel, with joy like other peoples, for you have played the harlot against your God. You have made love for hire on every threshing floor. The threshing floor and the winepress shall not feed them, and the new wine shall fail in her. The NKJV Study Bible comments on the practice of this worship. Because of their association with the harvest, threshing floors were the site of agricultural festivals in which Israel offered up sacrifices to Baal. The Lord would take away the joy of the harvest by destroying the crops and leaving the threshing floors and wine vats empty. Because of their unfaithfulness, they would be exiled from the land and taken into captivity in Assyria. Hosea 9, verse 3. They shall not dwell in the Lord's land, but Ephraim shall return to Egypt and shall eat unclean things in Assyria. In Hebrew parallelism, the phrase return to Egypt and eat unclean things in Assyria are restatements of the same idea. When the children of Israel experienced difficulties in the wilderness, they returned in their hearts to Egypt, desiring food of that land over the manna provided by God. Numbers 11, 4 through 6. Now the mixed multitude who were among them yielded to intense cravings, so that children of Israel who wept again and said, "Who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish which we ate freely in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our whole being is dried up. There is nothing at all except this manna before our eyes." One of the 5 offerings was the peace or shalem sacrifice. It is the only one that is actually referred to as a sacrifice. The peace sacrifice is actually a shared meal with friends and family, the priests, and God. Anyone who is clean may eat the peace sacrifice. In contrast, anyone who is unclean and eats the sacrifice makes the whole sacrifice unclean. In particular, a mourner of the dead who has come into contact with the dead and is therefore unclean, any food he eats is unclean for others. Hosea uses this imagery in his explanation of eating unclean things in Assyria. Hosea 9, verse 4. They shall not offer wine offerings to the Lord, nor shall their sacrifices be pleasing to him. It shall be like bread of mourners to them. All who eat it shall be defiled. For their bread shall be for their own life. It shall not come into the house of the Lord. The peace sacrifices brought to God are like the unclean food that is eaten by mourners. Anyone who participates in eating these sacrifices becomes defiled. The bread is not good for the shared meal with God. They might as well just eat it. The Stone Edition Tanakh comments on this verse. Because they are brought without feelings of sincere contrition, God considers their offerings like food that is defiled by people who have had contact with the dead. They might as well save their money and eat the food themselves rather than offer it to God, who does not accept it. A deeper meaning is suggested about their bread being for their own life. The word life is nephesh, number 5315, meaning a breathing creature, the breath or soul or life. This last part of Hosea 9:4 can be read as the bread for their soul remains outside the house of the Lord. Israel has been cut off from God. Yeshua said that he is the bread of life. Look at John 6:33 through 35. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Then he said to him, Lord, give us this bread always. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. The northern kingdom of Israel rebelled against God and the covenant that God had made with them. They continually worshipped other gods at the altars of the golden calves and on the threshing floors. They rejected both God and David as their king. Their leaders were corrupt and exploited the people. As a result, God would exile them from the land, sending them to Assyria. He would also exile them from his presence. God rejected their sacrifices. They had been cut off from the bread of life. I'm Dan Cathcart for Moed Ministries International. Shalom and be blessed.